I hope you all can hear me.
Whoa.
Now he said it's better in the, it's better for the pickup on the video. Is it really better there?
Yes, it is.
Okay, it's better for the pickup on the video. This is why we do this. There are handouts which are floating around. That's our outline for this evening. We're probably going to have one more of these pre-Yontif review classes. Maybe we'll see if we can do one for the 3 weeks, but we're certainly going to do before Shavuos in terms of the halachos, the customs, and all that. But this week we're going to do Sefirat Omer, and so I do apologize that we didn't have a chance to do this earlier in the Sefirat period, but we're going to get to it now, even though we are just past Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Okay, so the holiday, the teaser flyer which went out today essentially is the basis for the outline which we have, and I'm going to go through it piece by piece. Now, when it comes to the question of how to count and how not to count, the laws for Sefirat Omer about how to count are in the Shulchan Aruch 489, which is the laws related to the second day of Pesach. Of course, that's when we begin counting. There is a discussion in the Talmud, in the Gemara Menachos, recording the opinion of Ameimar, that when the Beis Hamikdash is not functioning, the mitzvah of Sefirat Omer is only a rabbinic obligation. And it's therefore the case that Ameimar believes that since the mitzvah today is only Zecher L'Mikdash, it's only meant to remember the fact that we had a Beis Hamikdash, and once upon a time the carbon of the Omer was brought, and it would lead from that time until Shavuos, when we started counting the 7 weeks. So he actually says, since we don't have a Beis Hamikdash now, the proper practice is to count just the number of days. And so in other words, today, which is 16, so we would just say Hayom Shisha Asar Yom, and that's it. Of course, because there are different viewpoints as to what the proper practice is today, in other words, why we're actually doing this. So as a result, the Shulchan Aruch does record that we do both. We count the number of days and we count the number of weeks plus days. So that is the practice which we have, and it's codified that way in the Shulchan Aruch. And of course, as far as the rules related to counting, so on the second day of Yontif, I mentioned the joke about which I did last year as well, which is that somebody comes home during Sefirat Omer and asks his wife, "What's for dinner?" And she says, "Well, last night we had chicken." And that's the joke. And the reason is because the reason for the joke is because before a person actually counts, once the obligation for the evening of Sefirat Omer kicks in, we generally encourage not to actually say the number, because then it's as if you've counted. You want to fulfill the obligation of counting in the context of the bracha, of saying the bracha and then saying the actual counting number. So, and if that number is recited beforehand, so it's essentially expunged your obligation for that evening, and therefore you don't really say bracha anymore because you've already counted. So that's the reason for trying to avoid saying the number. Of course, it opens up for another joke, which my grandfather was very fond of during Hanukkah time. How many candles are we lighting tonight? And last night we lit 4, which of course is ridiculous because it has nothing to do with that. You still light and you still say a bracha in Hanukkah time. Okay, so and of course it's not just in the nighttime, but even during Bein Hashmashim. So really, the ideal time for saying the counting Sefirat Omer is after the stars have come out. The Biur Halacha and the other commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch say, look, but what happens if you're in a situation, and we have this, of course, in shul, certainly on Friday night, but really every evening, because we count before the stars come out. We count during the Bein Hashmashos period. So nonetheless, the practice is certainly in a tzibur to count with a bracha. In the event that a person feels that they'll remember to count, so they can hold off on saying the bracha and then say it when they get home after the stars have come out. And certainly people who are aware of themselves that they can do that should be encouraged to do so. But the tzibur is still going to count, and that is ideal. Somebody in shul pointed out that he has an app on his phone which reminds him when to count. So assuming that a person is cognizant of their app reminder, and they actually will do that. So it's certainly a good way to do it. When it comes to Shabbos, so the practice of, I I mentioned this in Shul a couple days ago, I think it was on Shabbos, that we want to lengthen Shabbos as much as possible. So when it comes to Friday night, we say Kiddush, and then we count Sefirat Omer. When it comes to Saturday night, we count Sefirat Omer, and then we say Havdalah. That's how we do it in Shul. And in general, hopefully, that covers most of the questions that a person will have, save for, of course, if a person does forget to count in the nighttime, you can make it up in the morning without saying the bracha, and then the continuation saying with the bracha will happen. If a person misses an entire day, then the halacha says just continue to count, but without saying the bracha. The rule about if a person turns bar mitzvah, not for now, it's a bigger discussion. Okay, the second point which we have in the on the outline discusses or addresses the morning customs of Sefirat Omer. Specifically mentioned here are haircuts, music, etc. There's another significant custom which is also raised in the Shulchan Aruch, which is the custom of women not to do melacha in the evenings during Sefirat Omer. But actually the word morning is kind of interesting, simply because as much as the Shulchan Aruch addresses and says that the reason for these different practices are because of the deaths of the students of Rabbi Akiva. We're going to get into some theories about that in a few moments. But it doesn't really call them minhagei avelus. The Shulchan Aruch says we refrain from doing these things, but it doesn't mention the word avelus. It just says it's because Rabbi Akiva's students die. So is it more of a commemoration of what happened? And if you think about it, the concept of avelus. It's hard really to put into words in this way. We have another time period during the year when we have minhagei avelus, it's practices of mourning, and that of course is during the 3 weeks period. Or Soloveitchik was but he's noted for having called the 3 weeks period. He compared the 3 weeks until the 9 days to be similar to the 12 months of mourning that a person would have after the death of a parent. And the 9 days itself, up until Tisha B'Av, is like Shloshim, like the 30 days of mourning that follow the death of any close relative. And Tisha B'Av itself to be similar to Shiva. But there's no basis in halacha to compare the Sefirat Omer period to anything similar to Shloshim, like Rabbi Soloveitchik said about the 9 days. I mean, honestly, in the rules of that morning of that period, the Sephardic make a distinction. There's no such thing as the 3 weeks in the Sephardic culture, and even the idea of the 9 days doesn't really exist. The only thing which they focus on is the Shavua Shechalbo, the week in which Tisha B'Av falls out. So to make a comparison of mourning from Sefirat Omer to the 3 weeks, there is no basis for that. And even to the 9 days, it's far fetched to make it such. Now, we can make the argument about whether there are weddings during the 3 weeks, fine. But for the most part, when it comes to looking at this time period in terms of the practices of mourning as they are, the main ones are really referring to haircuts and not even music. It's really about weddings, as we're going to see in a moment. Now, I mentioned, yes?
Sorry to jump to the previous thing, but I don't recall. What's the difference between some Siddur where they have, when you count, it says Hayom Yom La Omer.
La Omer and Ba Omer. So Richard is more equipped to answer that question because he gave it to our Torah about it, but we're going to get to it. I'm going to get to that when we turn to the next page. Okay? We're going to get to that soon. All right. I just want to go back to the point about women not working. The Shibbolei HaLeket brings two reasons for why there is this custom for women to not do malacha. Now, what malacha means is a different conversation. Is it related to malacha like Shabbos malacha? Probably not. It's probably more related to the way we refrain from doing malacha during Chol Hamoed, for example. But essentially, it means that women should get a night off. Now, what kind of malacha is prohibited during Chol Hamoed? Things which you don't really need. Things which you don't need per se during that time period. I mean, anything which is needed can be done. It's a little more involved, and I don't want to get into that discussion. But in any case, whatever it means that the women get an evening off during every night of Sefirat Omer. So the two reasons that the Shibbolei HaLeket records, one is that the women were heavily involved in the preparing of the dead. It was of Rabbi Akiva's students during this time period, so they are rewarded in a sense for getting for getting the evening off, because at the time period, either when they were doing that or the time period of Sefirat Omer, when we actually count, is during the nighttime, and so therefore that's one reward which is given to the women. The other one, which I think is actually a little nicer, is he says that the Korban HaOmer was the amount of flour, and the Korban HaOmer was 1/10 of an ephah of barley, not of flour, but of barley. And that is reminiscent of the offering which was brought by the sota, 1/10 of an ephah of barley. So what the Shibbolei Eleket suggests is that, if the Omer looks like sota, we want to say that, of course, our women are not going to be accused of being sotas and not going to be accused of infidelity. So to make it clear that there's no connection whatsoever, the women get the night off, because this has nothing to do with anything which they may have done, and it's a tribute and an honor to our Nashim Tzidkanios that he refers to say that one has nothing to do with the other, and therefore the women get the night off. Okay, now there is one more practice, by the way, related to the counting of Sefirat Omer, and that is to not eat until after the counting of Sefirat Omer. Presumably, in other words, once nightfall comes, if you haven't counted yet, so as soon as you count, then eating should take place. The distinction which is made is that if you're already in the middle of a meal, then as soon as nightfall comes, take a pause, count Sefirat Omer, and then continue eating. That's the best way to do it. Okay, so now the question is, when it comes to the students of Rabbi Akiva, which is of course mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch, and it's reported by the Rama as well, what is it about them that informs our practices during this time period? So the Gemara has a debate. I don't know if the Gemara doesn't really have a debate, but there is the Midrash has different viewpoints. The Gemara says that the reason why Rabbi Akiva's students died was because of he says, lo no, they didn't respect one another, and they died from a disease. And the disease is either pronounced asakra or askara, whatever that disease may be. Another viewpoint which is suggested as to why Rabbi Akiva's students died relates to perhaps their involvement in supporting Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba was, of course, a prominent figure during the time period who staged a revolt against the Romans. And Rabbi Akiva actually supported Bar Kokhba. He was known to believe that Bar Kokhba was the Mashiach. And there is a view that some of Rabbi Akiva's students followed Bar Kokhba and said, they're right, and some of them did not. Just as an aside point, I think yesterday was Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein's Yartzeit. And, I think it's today actually, Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein's Yartzeit, because today's still Rosh Chodesh. And one of the stories that came out about Rav Aaron, not that it wasn't a known story, but it just became a little more prominent, was that Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, I don't remember what it was, but certainly after Rav Aaron and Rav Amital Zichrono Livracha lost students during the wars of Israel, the Yom Kippur War in particular, but also in '82, they turned a lot more left politically because they didn't want to lose more students, just to put it on a simplistic level. So there was a point in time, I don't remember what the particular viewpoint that Rav Aaron was espousing was, but it was a left-leaning viewpoint about how he felt that the government should be supported in what they were doing. And because he felt that, and this is where classic Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, because he felt that, it's a political discussion, and he may have his own viewpoint based on his Torah knowledge and whatnot. But he said, "I'm not an expert." He allowed a student who was more right-leaning to present a rebuttal in the Beis Medrash, to which Rav Aaron just left it as it was, which is classic Rav Aaron Lichtenstein about integrity. So similarly, when it comes to Rabbi Akiva, there were some students who may have supported the Bar Kokhba along the lines of what the Rebbe was supporting, and there were some who said no, Bar Kokhba is not necessarily. So this viewpoint suggests that perhaps the sinas china, it's the way in which they didn't respect one another on account of this difference in political view, may have been what the Gemara is talking about, is what caused their deaths. It's hard to get into that discussion simply because we don't know. There are so many different viewpoints. Suffice it to say, there are others who say that this is narishkeit, that maybe the number 24,000 students that Rabbi Akiva had is an exaggeration, because the Gemara doesn't even call it 24,000, the Gemara calls it 12,000 pairs, 12 in general is just is a number. Whether the number is exaggerated is a different discussion. Okay, anyway, but when it comes to the morning practices, just getting back to that, so I mentioned Rabbi Akiva because the Shulchan Aruch ties it to the deaths of Rabbi Akiva students, but as far as the different practices, so there's a distinction which is made when it comes to haircuts and weddings versus all the extensions thereof. So haircuts is a classic sign of mourning. So as we know, when it comes to, for example, somebody who is in mourning in Shloshim, so they'll sooner shave, for example, especially nowadays when shaving is such a prominent and prevalent custom or practice to go clean shaven. Like a person can get away with going without a haircut for a longer period of time than they can get away with going without shaving. The rule when it comes to mourning is that for a man, at least when it comes to shaving, that when do you shave post the shloshim period? When your friends tell you, "Hey, buddy, it's time to shave." But they'll sooner say it's time to shave than they'll say it's time to get a haircut, because a person can go for longer without getting a haircut. I mean, unless everything is really disheveled, but usually a person can go for longer. And as a result, there is a difference of view when it comes to the haircuts versus the shaving. So even people who will shave on a regular basis during Sefirat HaOmer, just to bring Rav Aaron Lichtenstein as an example, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein was clean shaven, but he would but he would go without shaving until Friday. Every Erev Shabbos, he would shave during the Sefirat HaOmer period because he felt it's Kavod Shabbos. But would he get a haircut every Friday? I mean, I'm sure he wouldn't get a haircut every Friday anyway. But would he get a haircut during the Sefirat HaOmer period on any particular Friday? And the answer is no. He would wait until the Lag BaOmer point, just to show that there's a distinction between the cutting of the hair and the shaving. And I believe that Rabbi Soloveitchik had a beard, but Rabbi Soloveitchik was also of a similar viewpoint with reference to a distinction which is made between haircuts and shaving. Similarly, when it comes to weddings, so the Shulchan Aruch does say not to have weddings and not to have dancing. These are things which are considered to be what's called simchas mereyus, an overly rejoicing type of simcha, and that was to be discouraged. But when it comes to the discussion about music, so what we have now, what we see in certain communities, to have a moratorium on live music, that's a relatively new custom, and it's really an extension of the music from weddings, which is, oh well, if you can't have music at weddings, you can't have music at all. But some who are revisiting this, and the truth is that the first time I was open to this viewpoint was in reading Rabbi Daniel Sperber's book on Minhagei Yisrael. That's what it's called, in volume 2. So he has an article about the customs of Sefirat HaOmer, where he talks about how the idea of refraining from music during this time period is really, there's no real good source for it. It's really only the music that accompanies a wedding, which is to be refrained from. So if a person wants to go to a concert, for example, and they're not going to be dancing in the aisles when they go to a concert, it would seem that might even be okay. Certainly to go to a movie or to go to theater where there's music being played, and it's just it accompanies the experience. But if people aren't going to movies for the music, then you can go see a movie. Obviously, if a person is going to go to a musical, they're partially going for the music, but it's really for the entertainment, and there isn't a need to refrain from doing that during this time period, according to some people. Obviously, there are viewpoints who disagree, but it's really the weddings and the extension of music in weddings which cause for dancing, which is prohibited. Now, as a result of this, by the way, if you think about it. It's this type of ruling which is extended to the 3 weeks. So a lot of what we practice in both of these time periods are similar, but the question is it all correct? Is it all accurate to do this? If a person is in the avelus of the 12 months, for example, if we use Rabbi Soloveitchik's model of what the 3 weeks period is. So a person who's in avelus during this time period, they don't go to weddings. Can they go to a concert? Can they go to... so what's the rule? So it depends on what the concert does to them. It depends on what the movie does to them. Can somebody who's during the 12 months not go to a movie? So again, if you say that they can never go to a movie, it's a different conversation, okay? So you're in a more right-wing community. But what does the movie do for them? Does it bring them in? If you go to a movie by yourself, Are you the whole point is not to rejoice in, amongst other people. But if a person goes to movies because that's their thing, okay, if a person watches television, that's their thing. So are they not allowed to do that because it gives them a little bit of pleasure? I don't think that that's what Avelus is all about. Avelus is to the whole point is to say, look, I can't rejoice now because I've lost my parent. But to have, but I don't think that Halacha is telling you to completely withdraw from life, and that's what the 12 months period is. So does that apply to the 3 weeks? I think that the answer would be that if Rabbi Soloveitchik's example is correct, that it's the 3 weeks parallels the 12 months. So I don't think that anybody would say that the Sefirat Omer period is any more than that. Even assuming that it even is that, which there is the possibility that it is not even supposed to be available. It's really a commemoration. Okay, what options for picking sections of 33 days are available? Okay, so now this becomes the most fun when it comes to trying to figure out. When the Shulchan Aruch tells us that there's a 33-day period of whatever it is that we're doing on account of the students of Rabbi Akiva, so it tells us that on Lag BaOmer, on the 33rd, actually the Shulchan Aruch calls it Lag LaOmer, interestingly enough. So Lag LaOmer, so on the 33rd day, Rabbi Akiva students stopped dying. So because they stopped dying, so anything which we're doing to commemorate their deaths ends at that time. And the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber, Yosef Karo says that any practices which a person has been abstaining from it can be broken on the 34th of the Omer. He actually says 33 full days, and the 34th you can do. The Ramah says that's not our opinion. Our viewpoint is that on the 33rd day itself, what we call Lag BaOmer, is the day in which these practices can end. And so those who haven't gotten a haircut can get a haircut. Those who haven't gotten married can get married. Those who haven't been listening to music, whatever. He doesn't mention the music, as I said before. But those restrictions end at that point. But on account of a whole slew of reasons, there are many other customs which have come up to try to give a nod to the 33-day period, while at the same time not necessarily following it. Because there is actually a viewpoint that says Rekiva students died throughout the entire period. Again, if that's even correct, which is just a whole different discussion. But they died during the 33-day period, but not on Lag BaOmer itself. Whatever that means, where did that number come from? And not on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Okay, so there is a viewpoint that says that the Sefirat Omer morning period is all the days of Sefirat Omer except for Shabbos, Chol HaMoed, and Yom Tov, and Rosh Chodesh, and Lag BaOmer itself. Because if you add those up, I think it's 16 days. You subtract them from 49, and there you have 33. Yes?
Are you saying like today you have a wedding or take care of
Today on Rosh Chodesh? So there are different viewpoints. So according to the Mechaber and the Ramah, who say you go for 33 days from the time, or 34 days, but from the time that Sefirat Omer begins until either Lamed Gimel BaOmer or Lamed Daled BaOmer, so the answer is no, you can't. But there are different viewpoints, and that's why I brought Rav Moshe Feinstein. I think the Mishabur actually records a bunch of them as well. We did them in Shul, but I gave it to you from this tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein, and instead of reading them for you inside, I'm going to just summarize them for you. Okay? The first one is where he quotes the Shulchan Aruch, which is to go until the 34th. Right? In other words, on Lamed Daled in the morning, you can shave, haircut, and all that stuff, have a wedding, fine. My grandparents got married. I remember asking my grandmother once, "What's your anniversary?" She didn't give me the English date. She said, "Lag BaOmer." Yes, apparently that was the practice. They got married Lag BaOmer in 1945. So I could find the English date if I cared by going by HebrewCalendar.org, hebcal.org. Okay. The next one is the Ramah, who says, like I mentioned, the 33rd day. That's where Moshe recounts. At the end of that first line of the second paragraph, I apologize for not putting in the next line. But Moshe says that there's another custom to get haircuts until after Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Then you go all the way until Shavuos, except for Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer, so in other words, there's an allowance to get haircuts on Rosh Chodesh, right, which would have been today, and Lag BaOmer, but otherwise, up until now through Rosh Chodesh, but otherwise to wait until Shavuos. Okay, the next opinion is that there are those who would, it says Yesh, are those who get haircuts until the first day of Rosh Chodesh Iyar, which is actually the last day of the month of Nisan, and then they wait until the Shloshes Yimei Hagbalah. So in other words, all of the month of Iyar, and then a couple of days into, which is 29 days, and then a couple of days into Sivan. So I guess I don't know how it really adds up, because Iyar is never really 30 days in our calendar. is always 29 days. So, but however it would add up. So it should be 33 days, or according to the Rama, 32 days, and the 33rd day has the allowance. The next one, which is the second to last paragraph on the page, says you start from Isru Chag until Rosh Chodesh Iyar, so that the Avelus period goes from, let's say 23 Nisan until Rosh Chodesh Iyar, excludes Rosh Chodesh Iyar and Lag BaOmer, and therefore it is all of Iyar. I'm sorry, that's one view, and then the next view is all of Iyar excluding the 1st through the 5th of Sivan. So the first 5 days of Sivan. Okay, but again, the whole point of all of these is sometimes they allow for Lag BaOmer, they allow on Rosh Chodesh, or they allow only one day of Rosh Chodesh, and then they come up with a 33-day calculation. The last opinion on the page says all days of from Pesach until Shavuos, except for Rosh Chodesh Iyar and Rosh Chodesh Sivan. So that's obviously a lot more than 33 days, because unless you say be Pesach. No, that would be from the beginning of Pesach. Turn over the page. We have another couple of opinions here. Both of the opinions which are on this page, they allow nothing special on Lag BaOmer. The first one says you have 28 days in Iyar, so in other words, after the first day of Iyar, after Rosh Chodesh, plus the 5 days in Sivan, which includes Rosh Chodesh Sivan. So there's no exception for Lag BaOmer at all, which everyone else up until now allowed for. 2 days of Rosh Chodesh Iyar, plus the whole month of Iyar, plus 3 days in Sivan. That's another opinion. So that's how you get 30 days, because you have 29 days of Iyar, plus the last day of the month of Nisan, plus the 3 days of the month of Sivan, leading up to the Shlosha Simei Agbala. That's another viewpoint. Another viewpoint says from Isru Chag through the first day of Rosh Chodesh, which is 6 days, then all of Iyar except for Rosh Chodesh and Lag BaOmer, which makes for 27 days. You have 6 days in the end of the month of Nisan, and then 27 days in Iyar with minus Rosh Chodesh and Lag BaOmer. So there you get an allowance for Lag BaOmer and an allowance for Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so those are the different viewpoints that people could theoretically practice, and of course that it opens up the door for a lot more days for weddings to take place if you're not just looking at the Mechaber and the Ramah, depending on how a person wants to practice following any of these permutations.
Well, what's the prevalent?
Yeah, so nowadays the prevalent is that any individual, they can do whatever they want in a particular year, but what they shouldn't do is they shouldn't, as I think it's the Mishnah Berurah says for sure, that you shouldn't, only have a practice of, let's say, 18 days, for example. And what some people do is they'll say, okay, we'll allow for a wedding up until Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and then and then not until the end of Shavuos. But of course, if you're making one wedding, so what's the big deal? You do it one way, and then you don't need to make a wedding from Rosh Chodesh Iyar until Shavuos. Some say no, we're going to wait until Lag BaOmer, and then after Lag BaOmer, all's good, following the Mechaber and the Ramah. So this is why you'll see nowadays, you'll see weddings up until Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and you'll see weddings after from Lag BaOmer and on, but you won't usually see weddings from Rosh Chodesh Iyar until Lag BaOmer itself.
Now, does that also mean that if you take, let's say you ask this year, I'm not going to take a haircut until Lag BaOmer.
Mm-hmm.
Next year, Rosh Chodesh, because of the schedule, I can do it a little differently. Is that in this book?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, that each year you can pick a different method, but the main thing is that whatever you pick, don't break it. So look at your calendar and pick one of these. Again, the most prevalent ones are just to go into Lag BaOmer. That's really just to follow what the Ramah says. That's what we have. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I don't see it covered here. What is the significance of the adjectives for every day? Hod, V'hod, Hod, Tiferes. I mean, what
Okay,
is
so that's Kabbalistic, and I'm not a Kabbalist, so I don't know.
and we've never seen the Omer without having that on there. Okay.
I don't know. That's the type of thing. The question was, how in the Sefirat Omer chart, on the left side of the chart, after the number, the number spelled out with the words, there's another phrase, Hod, whatever, Ozvanah, whatever the names are. I don't even pay attention to it, so I don't know what they are. Okay. All right, so we're up to section 4. What is Lag BaOmer, or should it be Lag LaOmer? So when it comes to this question, hold on, I just want to get this right. So Rabbi Soloveitchik was of the viewpoint that there are different ways to understand Sefirat Omer during this time period. One is to remember the glory of the Beis Hamikdash. The other is to remember the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, and so he says that after we counted the Omer, we request of Hashem to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, and that's the distinction that he makes between Lag LaOmer and Lag BaOmer. The definition of the one which is the commemoration of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, that is the Lag LaOmer, and the other one is to remember which one is it? Beis BaOmer is what?
BaOmer was the counting up to Mount Torah.
All right, okay, right. So that was the idea of counting up to Mount Torah. The Rabbi Soloveitchik is a whole mahalach, a whole viewpoint about why we're counting up, which I'm not going to get into now. But as opposed to normally I would count 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. So he says we're counting up because we're building up to Matan Torah, and that's the BaOmer viewpoint. The LaOmer is the idea of remembering the Beis Hamikdash and why we're counting today, the rabbinic obligation, and that was his explanation for Lag LaOmer. So Rabbi Soloveitchik was, I think my father told me that publicly he counted LaOmer, but he actually counted both. He counted both. One LaOmer was out loud and BaOmer was privately, and that is, or maybe he counted both publicly. I don't know. But my father told me that's what he does in terms of the counting. So what I do when I count for the shul, I just follow what's in the siddur. So in our siddur, it's Lag LaOmer. When I count up my kids, I do it BaOmer. So in that way I cover both ways. So that is so. Which one is Lag BaOmer? Is it Lag BaOmer or Lag LaOmer? It depends on your viewpoint. The Mechaber calls it Lag LaOmer. Certainly in Israel, which has turned this date into a holiday more important than Shavuos, it's Lag BaOmer. Yes.
Say a second bracha if you counted both ways?
No, you don't make exactly. One bracha and you're covered. The other counting. So I mean, look, in Hollywood, for example, Rabbi Davis actually counts, and in shul he counts both. I don't know which one he does first, which one he does second. According to the teaching that Rabbi Soloveitchik had, it sounds like you would count Lag BaOmer first, whatever the counting is, BaOmer, and then LaOmer, because LaOmer leads into a Rachamanu Yachas Yolanu. Amadas Beis Hamikdash Kumav Meher V'Minei. So okay. So what is the date? So again, one of the views about the source of the date is a commemoration of related to the deaths of Rabbi Akiva's students and all that. The question is whether an avelus of that kind really should carry through until this day. There isn't really a precedent in that way to carry an avelus, certainly for such a long period. But if you think about it, our avelus for Tisha B'Av, let's look at it from the Sephardic perspective, for example. The avelus, whatever they have, is just the Shavua Shechava, the week in which Tisha B'Av falls, and all the rules that we have for the 9 days apply. I believe during the Shavua Shechava, the week in which Tisha B'Av falls. Why? Because it's considered to be a time of tzara. It's not such a good day for the Jewish people. Okay, so and therefore this is what we have. But as far as a lengthy period of avelus, the Sephardim don't have it. And when we look at Tisha B'Av itself, we say, what's it all about? The destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. But is it just the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash that we're talking about, or are we talking about the destruction of the lives that also took place during that time period? I mean, if you look at the Talmud describing this time period, there's a horrible story. One of the kinos that we say in Tisha B'Av is about the murders that were committed by Nebuchadnezzar's general. Hundreds of thousands of people. Again, is it an exaggeration? I don't know if it's an exaggerated number. But certainly many, many, many people that Nebuchadnezzar murdered. So do we talk about them, or are we mourning a building? Which one are we supposed to be mourning? What are we talking about? And if you look at we'll just call it thousands of people that Nebuchadnezzar murdered. So we're really taking one day, and we're saying this is the day, and it's Tisha B'Av, and Rabbi Soloveitchik was of the view, by the way, that there shouldn't be a Yom HaShoah necessarily. Again, not that it's a bad thing, but there shouldn't be a Yom HaShoah because we heap all the days of Avelus into Tisha B'Av. That's what we do, and that's why all the kinnos that we have that we say at Tisha B'Av cover not just the time of the Beis Hamikdash, but we have for the Crusades, and we have for the Spanish Inquisition, and we have for the burning of the Talmud. We have a lot of things which are all associated to Tisha B'Av. So looking at the students of Rabbi Akiva, is it really, if you're going to take an event, and it's a tragic event, you think about the significance of what was lost with the deaths of Rabbi Akiva students. I mean, I like to think that the whole reason for the significance of the loss of Rabbi Akiva students is because of what they could have accomplished had they been there. The Gemara tells us that after Rabbi Akiva's students died, he went, he moved, and he found, depending on which viewpoint you follow, because the Midrash has other examples, but the Gemara mentions he had 5 students, there's another view that he had 6 students, another view that he had 7 students, and it lists them, and that these are the ones who taught Torah to all of Israel. Okay, so if you can see what 6 could accomplish, can you imagine if in fact the number 24,000 is accurate, what 24,000 could have accomplished, and what they could have done. What emerged at that time period? Rabbi Akiva lived shortly after the destruction, during the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and shortly after. What emerged during that time period? A different religion which took over Europe and was a source. It was a thorn in Israel's side for a very, very, very long time until the Pope finally said, "All right, we'll get along," and apologize for the murders of the Jews for the centuries and for the millennia. So the Holy Roman Empire emerged and picked for themselves a religion. What would have stopped them from taking Judaism, theoretically, if Rabbi Akiva's students could have spread Torah to much further corners of the world? So maybe that's something to mourn for. It's a thought. Okay, so that's on the downside, or perhaps on the good side. I mean, the question could also be asked, by the way. Rabbi Akiva's students died. They don't die on Lag BaOmer. Therefore, it's a reason to celebrate. It sounds ridiculous, and that's they didn't. And if you follow the viewpoint that says that they died throughout the Sefirat Omer period, just not on Lag BaOmer, it's like, okay, so there's a little break in the action, but that doesn't mean But they continue to die, so this is a day that is a day to celebrate. Sounds ludicrous. The Gra, the Shulchan Aruch, his viewpoint is that why is this a time to celebrate? Not because the deaths. Not because Rabbi Akiva's students stopped dying, but because it's the end of the Gezerah. He compares it to Tu B'Av. Remember what's Tu B'Av? Tu B'Av is the day that the Gemara tells us that every year on Tisha B'Av, because of the sin of the spies, every year on Tisha B'Av the Jewish people would dig graves for themselves, and they would get into the graves, and in the morning, whoever didn't die that year woke up and climbed out of the grave. And then the last year that they were in the desert, they dug their graves at Tisha B'Av, they got in the morning everybody got up. So they said, maybe we counted wrong, and they continued to do that every night until they saw the full moon. We know that the full moon means it's the 15th of the month. So that year was Tu B'Av, and they realized, the Gezerah is over. The Gemara tells us, the Mishnah tells us, that one of the happiest days on the Jewish calendar is Tu B'Av. Why? You look at it and you say, a whole generation died. What are you celebrating? You're celebrating not that the generation died, that had to happen. What you're celebrating is that the Gezerah is over, and we can now move on. Similarly, there's a Gezerah that can go into the land of Israel. So there was a Gezerah against Rabbi Akiva's students that they're going to die. They stopped dying, so now Rabbi Akiva can move on and find the 5 students that are going to teach Torah and save the Torah for the Jewish people. That is something to celebrate. Not what happened, but where we're going on from here. So that's another viewpoint. Lag BaOmer as well. Some associated with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. There's a debate as to what the association of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is, whether it's his birthday, whether it's his death day, right, his yahrzeit, or maybe it's the day that he emerged from the cave, maybe it's the day that he introduced the Zohar to the world. A lot of different possibilities, and this is the reason why Meron, where Shimon Bar Yochai's grave is reported to be, is a destination day in Israel on Lag BaOmer. And there's a lot of upsharons, haircuts, which take place there. First haircuts for little children take place at the cave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on Lag BaOmer in Israel. There are other reasons which are suggested for why this time period. If you say that it's not necessarily a time of mourning because of the deaths of Rabbi Akiva's students, so some say, well, you know what else happened during this time period? And I'm kind of combining the other theories with D below in 5D, and that is that during this time period, one of the practices that we have is to say Avarachamim every Shabbos during the Sefirat period. And the reason is because Avar Rachamim was composed in memory of the martyrs during the time period of the Crusades. And as a result, when one of the main cities that were destroyed during the time of the Crusades were Mainz, Speyer, and Worms, and Vermeisen, right? Mainz, Speyer, Magenza. Worms, Speyer, Magenza. I meant to say Worms first, but I was Worms, Speyer, Magenza, Mainz. So those took place during this time period, during the months of Iyar in particular, and the month of Sivan, extending into Sivan past Shavuos, one of the dates which is noted on the calendar is Chav Sivan, also a day of destruction. But the point being that during that time period, during the time of the Crusades, they said, look, we have some traditions that we have based on the students of Rabbi Akiva, whether we're continuing to mourn them or not, but we're certainly commemorating their deaths. Let's mourn now because of what is taking place during this time period in the Crusades. And another stamp was put on that in the years of Tachvatat, 1648 and 1649, during the Chmielnitsky massacres, when the springtime was when they came out and they wreaked their havoc against the Jewish people in the times of Bogdan and Chmielnitsky. So that's another stamp of approval which is given on the mourning period of this time and may have contributed significantly to this time period being a time of mourning. There are other viewpoints. There's an article, I know he's a conservative rabbi, but he's still very knowledgeable, Rabbi David Golinkin, and there's an article which I found online in which he raises another couple of suggestions for why this time period may have been the time for the mourning. So believe it or not, he quotes Dr. Julius Landsberger, who says that there's a period called Lemuralia, and that it is borrowed from the Romans, that the Romans did not marry during the 31 days of May. Funeral rites were honoring the souls of the departed, which returned to wander over the earth. And he quotes two lines which were popular during that time: if you marry in Lent, you will live to repent. Marry in May, rue the day, and that's why so many people get married in June. And he says that it's a 31-day period. It sounds very similar to what this time period is. It's a theory. I'm not saying that it's correct. I don't know, but that is a theory. Another theory, which is quoted by Tzidkiah ben Avraham HaRofei, this is a what he calls the Gehenna theory. He's from Italy. He says that Rabbi Akiva says that the sentence of the wicked in Gehenna is 12 months. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says the sentence of the wicked in Gehenna is from Pesach until Atzeres. So maybe that's the reason why we mourn between Pesach and Shavuos for the wicked who are suffering in Gehenna. There's another viewpoint, which he calls the agricultural anxiety theory, and that is that the Mishnah tells us in Rosh Hashanah that on Pesach the grain is judged, and on Atzeres the fruit of the trees are judged. So because it's a time of anxiety for the produce of the world, that maybe it was a time that people were nervous about what's going to come, and therefore this time period may have been a time for a different kind of mourning, and it stemmed to people doing teshuvah during this time period. In other words, if you think about what the mourning practices are meant to do, they're meant to distract us from simcha so that we can focus our attention on doing teshuvah during this time period. That one actually is pretty compelling if you follow what the Mishnah says about these Rosh Hashanahs of the year in which the world is judged. Rabbi Yaakov Emden, in his Siddur Beis Yaakov, he wrote that Rabbi Akiva's students died, and due to our many sins, a number of communities were destroyed at the same time of year during the Crusades in Ashkenaz and in 1648 in Poland. And maybe, as I mentioned before, this is Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who's no slouch, who is suggesting that perhaps this is why the mourning practices continue until this time. Okay. How are we to relate to the state of Israel's calendar days, Yom HaAtzmaut, Yom HaYerushalayim, Yom HaShoah, etc.? Okay, so this is what this will conclude. So there are different viewpoints as to whether what's the propriety of observing these days during this time of year. Right, the month of Nisan is considered to be a joyous time. That's one of the reasons why we don't say Tachnun. Maybe it's reversed for a lot of us. Right? We don't say Tachnun, therefore the whole month of Nisan is joyous and all that. But certainly, in the olden days, it was considered to be a month of joy. And so the question is whether it's appropriate to actually have a Yom HaShoah. The Israeli chief rabbinate had their debate about it. Some wanted to commemorate the Yom HaShoah on Asar B'Teves. I mentioned Rabbi Soloveitchik's viewpoint. that all the things should be done on Tisha B'Av. Suffice it to say, it's been largely accepted by just about every community except for the Haredi one, to have a Yom HaShoah and to observe it during this time period. I don't think that Yom HaShoah adds negatively to any mourning practices that we have in terms of the month of Sefira. The question really relates to the month of Nisan. The questions which are more difficult, though, are Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim. And Rabbi David Brofsky, who is a longtime member of the Kollel in Yeshiva Gush Etzion, and he's made a name for himself as an internet rabbi article writer. I don't know if that's a nice way it's probably a better way to describe it. But he has an article which you can find online, which is called Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim. And in it, he brings a number of examples of why it's okay to establish new holidays at all. For example, the Chassam Sofer says a person can certainly establish days which commemorate other miracles. The Talmud never meant to discourage or prohibit establishing festive days for cities or countries, but rather only a festival meant to be observed by the entire Jewish people. Okay, and a great example of that, by the way, is in the Chai Adam. The very end of the Chai Adam, he talks about a time in the halachos of Chanukah or Purim, I don't remember. But he talks about I think it's a Purim, he says, where they were saved. There was a major fire in the complex where he lived. The Chai Adam was a wealthy businessman. And as a result, he said that we have commemorated for our family our own holiday, our own special holiday, on the day when the family was saved. Nobody died, even though they lost a lot of property, but nobody died. It's a fascinating tale that Chai Adam recounts. It's the very last section of Chai Adam where he talks about this. And there is cause to allow for a Yom Tov, certainly for a family to celebrate an event of that kind. And that raises the question whether it's appropriate for the land of Israel, where the miracle really took place, or to celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut, or Judaism worldwide. Certainly, it would seem that the Chassam Sofer would say, all right, maybe there's cause to do it in the neighborhood of the land of Israel versus everywhere else. So that in and of itself is a point to consider. When it comes to the recitation of Hallel on Yom HaAtzmaut, I gave a shir about this on Shabbos, but there are different viewpoints as to the propriety of saying Hallel in general, whether to say it with the bracha, and the debate goes on in Israel. I'm not going to get into it now, but the debate goes on. But certainly the observance of Yom HaAtzmaut, even by those who say that Hallel on Yom HaAtzmaut should be recited without a bracha, they certainly don't have a problem with saying that there can be music on Yom HaAtzmaut in general. That is the fairly accepted practice. I mentioned before that music might not even be problematic, even though people who have music, they do start to dance on Yom HaAtzmaut, but there's certainly what to celebrate, certainly in Israel, and even for the Jewish people in general. The miracle of the state of Israel is something which is beneficial to all the Jews throughout the world. Even if people do have a problem with it in certain very right-wing communities, nonetheless, they cannot make the argument that going to Israel now is not a relatively safe venture for Jewish people, whereas it wouldn't be that way if it were not under Jewish hands. There's no legs to stand on in that argument. And the similar debates are raised with reference to the propriety of saying Hallel on Yom Yerushalayim. Suffice it to say as well that even if one might argue that the establishment of the state of Israel, in which a war was going on, and was it 10% of the population of the Jewish people during that time period were lost, there are different viewpoints as to what the nature of that miracle is. It's certainly a modern miracle to see a Jewish state. There are those who are of a much stronger viewpoint when it comes to Yom Yerushalayim because of how the Jewish state was threatened to be destroyed, and they were planning for another Holocaust. And if you think about the numbers of the Jews that were in Israel at that time, and as small as Israel was, and how that war turned to be such a miraculous salvation for the Jewish people, so there are different viewpoints as well with respect to Yom Yerushalayim. Just to quote from Rabbi Brofsky's article, he says, one might suggest the Hallel described by the Gemara Pesachim, which one recites in response to a miracle, should also be spontaneous as shira and not preceded by a blessing. The closer one is to an event, the less formal, more natural the Hallel becomes. If so, he says, the model of Hallel without a blessing may actually be the more appropriate Hallel for Yom HaAtzmaut. Those who daven in religious Zionist communities in Israel and Yom HaAtzmaut can most likely testify to the genuine feeling of fervor and relevance with which Hallel is recited in Yom HaAtzmaut. He says, while what is written above may be applied equally to Yom Yerushalayim, some believe that the victory of the Six-Day War more closely resembles the redemption described by the Talmud, which allows for a recitation of Hallel. Therefore, the chief rabbinate, in a ruling signed by Rav Unterman, Rav Yitzchak Nisim, Rav Zevin, and Rav Yisraeli, ruled that Hallel and Yom Yerushalayim should be recited with the blessing, whereas there wasn't that same consensus for Yom HaAtzmaut. So certainly, to look at the celebrations of those time periods would allow for certain celebrations beyond whatever might be restricted during this time period, owing to the commemoration of the mourning periods at this time, whether it's because of Rabbi Akiva's students, or whether it's the Crusades, or whether it's the Tach B'Tat, the 1648, 1649. We have to look at things in their historical context. Those were certainly mourning periods because of the destruction, but what took place Yom HaAtzmaut on the 5th of Iyar, and what took place on the 28th day of Iyar with Yom Yerushalayim are certainly reasons to be joyous and to celebrate, owing to the modern miracles that we've seen in our time. So hopefully this is a fairly good overview for the Sefirat Omer period in terms of how to count and how to observe the different practices of mourning or commemoration during this time period, and the limitations which may be meant to hold us back from Simcha, and the allowances for Simcha owing to the modern miracles of our time. And thank you very much.